Welcome to the CMO Chapter podcast, where we dive deep into the dynamic world of Chief Marketing Officers. Join us as we explore the careers, insights, and strategies of top marketing executives who shape the brands we know and love. Whether you're a seasoned marketer, aspiring CMO, or simply just curious to understand what it really takes to step into the shoes of the CMO. This podcast is your backstage pass to discovering what it's like to really lead and innovate in the ever-evolving landscape of business. Stay tuned as we uncover the stories of the visionaries behind the brand. So I am delighted this morning to have Teresa Sperti joining me. I've known Teresa, I feel like, 10 years, 8 years now, a long, long time. I think since the office work days. Certainly someone that I've admired from afar for a long time, and I'm so excited to have you on the show. So Teresa, do you want to introduce yourself to kick off?
Sure. And I can't believe you started opening by saying you've admired me. That's so lovely to say. So, hi everyone. I'm Teresa Sperti. I'm the founder and director of Arktic Fox, which is an advisory, consulting, and training organisation in all things ecom, digital, data, and I'm also an ex CMO.
Excellent, excellent. So tell me a little bit more about Arctic Fox, because as I've said earlier, like I've sort of followed your career and you've done so much over those years. Tell me a bit more. I mean, you've had your consultancy now for how long? Is it nearly 5
Yeah,
years?
it's over 5 years now. Yeah. It's gone very quickly.
And I bet it has.
Yeah.
So what made you take that move from, you were CMO at World Vision, had a fantastic, I mean, you still have a fantastic career, but then you saw that opportunity to start your own business.
Yeah.
So what made you do that?
So I think there's a couple of things in that question. Firstly, I always had the desire to run my own business. And so I think, I always had in the back of my mind that by the age of 40, I probably wanted to move out of corporate and be doing my own thing. The challenge always was what was that thing going to be? And I thought that I would be able to work it out whilst I was working client side, but I didn't. And so that was probably the first element that drove me to the dark side, if you like. Um, the second element was that I had a very big personal challenge, where I hit a crossroads in my life. There were some things that happened personally to me when I was in the role as a CMO. And when you are in a CMO role, you're highly visible across the organization.
Mm,
And so, what I realized very quickly, given my personal circumstance, was I didn't feel it was right for me to try and lead a team of what was 75 people at that time, whilst enduring so many personal challenges related to loss of child and babies and
mm,
that type of thing. So I think that that was really a catalyst for me to say, well, right now I can't be the leader that I need to be,
yeah.
and I need to take a step back. And so I hit that juncture and in the road. And I think, had I not, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking about the fact that I've been running my own business for 5.5 years. The third component is really that what I realized by being a senior leader within a large organization is that the world of, the business world is rapidly changing. And
Yeah.
I'd been in digital by that point. I started my career in digital back in 2003, digital and data. And so I'll often refer to myself as a bit of an old dog in the industry because there's not that many people that have been in the industry for 20 years, although it is growing. The organizations that I'd been in were going through rapid change. There was a lot of transformation occurring. And, it requires a modern skill set and a new and different skill set. And I had a lot of those, I had built a lot of that skill set over time. But what I realized was as I lent into that CMO role, it was really difficult to find a provider that could help me make the
Mm,
change that I needed to across the team, to upskill the team, to build the capability within the team, to lean into the executive to help drive that kind of change in focus,
yeah.
to evolve the role and perception of marketing within the organization. They aren't typically the types of providers you find in market, and it's not the typical type of support you get from your agency partner. So I really started asking the question of myself, well, who helps people like me? And that's where Arctic Fox came from, really. And, our core focus is one part kind of the strategic piece. How do we create that strategic clarity and that roadmap in order to drive change across the organization through the team, with a real focus on kind of digital data, e-commerce and customer. And
Yep.
then how do we then upskill the team, which is where our whole kind of training and learning component comes in from a service offering perspective.
I mean, you do so much. I bet you're in demand.
We are. It's not just me. My team, me and my team are in very high demand, and I'm very thankful for all of the support that we've got from the market. I think that when I established the business, my thought process would be that we'll be playing tier two mostly from a brand perspective. What we've really found that we are servicing the biggest and the best brands in the country, and I'm really
Brilliant.
really thankful for that. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's fantastic. So I guess, from my perspective, somebody like yourself, you're very specialized, very niche. You've got so much, I guess really sort of tech knowledge. And what sort of specific, is there any, I guess, can we get any sort of like nuggets of information around any trends or, anything that you're, emerging trends that we're really seeing? I mean, we all talk about AI, we know about that, but as businesses, like what are you seeing at the moment in the market?
That's a really interesting question and could probably be a whole podcast
I know, but
on
yeah.
that topic. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, right? Let's not talk AI and Gen AI, because I think everyone knows that is kind of one of the key trends that are upon us, that is really going to shape the next kind of 3 to 5 years. And I think it's talked about a lot. So
Yeah.
there's probably people far more experienced than me to talk about that topic in detail. Look, I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing I'll touch on is privacy. And I think obviously privacy is not a new concept. We've had a Privacy Act in Australia for a long period of time. And when we look overseas, Europe, moved in the mid, kind of 2015, 16 in terms of rebooting what it looks like to deliver a modern Privacy Act into the European Union. But we are on the cusp of what is the single biggest change to the Privacy Act since it was enacted in 1988. And I don't believe that businesses actually realise just how significant this change is.
Yeah.
And it's going to change everything. It's going to change how we design and develop experiences. It is going to fundamentally reshape the control and flexibility we need to provide to customers, and the transparency around data, how it's managed, and give them more rights and ability to manage it and decide how their data is used. But also, if you look at from a compliance point of view and a breach point of view, the regulators are getting really serious about, breaches and non-compliance. And so I think that, whilst historically organisations have probably been able to be quite lax around management of privacy, I think that door is closing, and it's closing very, very quickly. And what I can tell you is, from all of the brands that we either partner with in market and or that we talk to in market through various mechanisms and ways, whether it's through training or otherwise through our research, most brands even today are not compliant, let alone compliant with what is coming. So I think the next kind of 3 to 5 years is going to be quite a significant shift in the mindset of business leaders in this country, as well as customer leaders, around the role and importance of, customer privacy and holding the tension with, delivering great experience, but also ensuring that privacy is at the core of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think, if you look at Europe and you look at the mindset of leaders there, it's fundamentally different to where we are at. And I think that gone are the days where we can just assume, well, customers, they want great experience, therefore we can use their data for whatever we believe is appropriate. We're going to have to move on from that.
Yeah.
That's a really, really big one that I would say. I think the second really big one, and this is, you've probably got an array of different leaders and professionals that listen to the podcast across different industries, but I would say from a retail perspective, the big one that I've been talking about for quite a long time, and I think the market's, it's finally dawning on the market, is that Amazon's a real threat. It's a real threat in this, right? So they have demonstrated significant growth over the last kind of 3 to 5 years. And if you look at their trajectory, it's believed today already they've now probably by the end of the year will reach $6.5 billion in gross transaction value.
Gosh.
Huge, yeah. So not sales that they bank, but the total revenue going through the platform. That is a lot of money that historically has been going
Just
to
a bit.
traditional retailers, right? So that kind of shift in migration in audiences, and the growth of their Amazon Prime membership. In Australia,
Mm,
4.1 million Australians already using Amazon Prime,
wow.
and that drives frequency and shifts behavior.
Mhm.
So, and then to further add to that, you look at the investment they are making in fulfillment centers across the country. They've made a statement that by 2026, they want to be able to have same day delivery out of every metro city.
Wow.
I think this is a fundamental shift that we are seeing in market around how shoppers will buy and where they will buy. And it's going to really challenge retailers, CPGs, FMCGs to think very, very differently about their strategy. And I would say some have started to adapt and are more mature, and there's some that are still kind of either unaware that this shift is happening, or alternatively, are probably a little bit in denial that this shift is occurring.
Wow. Wow.
So there's a
Gosh.
couple for you. But, I mean, I could talk trends all day, right? It's part of what we do. We spend a lot of time analysing categories and markets and looking at where, what shifts are happening in order to shape. So,
Mhm.
but they're two
No.
that I think are really kind of front of mind.
Yeah, no, thank you, thank you. I think already, I know there's going to be listeners there going, "Oh my gosh!" Like you said, people are going to be like, "God, she's nailed it. She's so right." Or, "Oh my gosh, we've not thought about this." So definitely a couple of light bulb moments there.
Yeah.
Um, I guess on that, I mean, some conversations that I've been having recently with actually quite a few CMOs has been the role of a CMO
Mm,
in the future, like already, I mean, certainly this last year, I've seen, chief growth officer, and as we know, we've got CXO, et cetera, coming through more prominently.
mm,
How do you see, I mean, there is that concern, especially in the job market this year, where, we haven't seen as many CMO roles
yeah,
being advertised
yeah,
in general.
yeah.
Do you see that role? How do you see that role, I guess, evolving? I mean, I personally feel like there's always going to be that requirement, but then it's just going to become so much broader. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
So I think there's a couple of components to unpack around that question.
Mm,
And I don't think the shift has just been happening now. I mean, when I started Arktic Fox, that shift was already happening. We saw,
right.
the shift to we saw the emergence of the chief revenue officer, the chief growth officer, the chief customer officer. They are all different flavors of, I would say, in part the same thing, because it will depend on the organization and what the role and remit is of those roles. I think what is really challenging about the marketing role, particularly in Australia, is that historically we have been an oligopoly in many categories and markets. And so to truly differentiate and compete, brands haven't had to work that hard.
Yeah.
And so, the promotional element of the 4Ps has been critical, and that's where most marketers have played.
Yeah.
But what is happening with the rapidly changing business landscape is, that status quo way of operating is just not driving growth anymore. And so it's really challenging brands to need to think differently. And this is why we're seeing this emergence of a series of different roles, right? As experience becomes more important to differentiate, we need greater focus on
Yeah.
experience. As our markets become more cluttered, we need to start innovating. We need to go back to the drawing board and think about proposition, pricing, product, all of those components typically
Mm-hmm.
form, part potentially of like a chief growth role. And so in a way, I feel like, and particularly locally, but it's also happening globally, part of this is a rebrand of what is perceived to be marketing, in that because leaders across the organization hold a whole lot of historical perceptions around what does marketing do and what does it
Yeah.
do. And historically, as I said, in this country, a lot of marketers have been focused on one of the 4Ps. It's been
Mm,
the promotional P. And so it's a signal to the organization that, that this function actually has to play a much bigger role in driving the business strategy,
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
and really helping us prioritize our focus around the customer. And in some organizations, that is absolutely a bit of a rebrand exercise. Whereas in others, I would say it's a fundamental shift in the accountabilities of that role, and it's becoming that broader remit, as you say.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think, I'm curious as well. I think, I'm seeing and I had, again, this conversation with quite a few other CMOs where, you know, we're seeing a lot of people entering marketing. They wanna, they've come out of university, they're qualified, et cetera, and, the first thing what they wanna do is purely focus on social media. It's like, social media, that's what I wanna do, and, I get it. Most of these individuals, I'm guessing around that sort of like early 20s sort of mark, they're on it every day, you know, that's just a natural, but, there's concern that I guess, certain CMOs are going, "Well, there's this wave of individuals and all they're doing is focusing on this social media and
Yeah.
content, etc." Like, when I was studying, I was doing rotation programs and I was becoming so much more broader. So, the evolution of leaders coming through, how is that going to affect us?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I might answer the question in a roundabout way. So
Yeah, no,
let's
go for
see how we go. I'll riff this and let's see if we end up back to where we started. But
it.
a number of years ago, I was having a conversation with a lecturer at a very sizable university locally, and I was talking about the issue and challenge around a lack of commerciality in the marketing sector. Within our report that we do every single year, we see commercial acumen as a significant gap coming through in skill set across
Mhm.
the marketing industry. And so I was unpacking it with this lecturer. And he was saying to me that ultimately, when the university thinks about development of courses, they are serving the individual, they're not servicing the needs of businesses in
Mm,
Australia. And, if the program and course is geared too much towards kind of commercial and financial components, people won't take the course. And I thought that was a really interesting
mm,
insight around how universities develop programs and content in order to effectively compete, because it obviously they are the conduit to the next generation of marketers.
yeah,
But if they are not serving the needs of industry, then of course we are going to have some of what is playing out today. Right. If you think about the role of the marketing leader in today's environment, it is far more strategic, it's far more commercial, it's far more, um, in a lot of organizations, it requires the ability to be able to operate at the highest level,
yeah, yeah,
to drive that shift and change and really embed that customer focus. And so this is the challenge where we find ourselves in industry, because how are we going to cultivate that next
mm,
wave of leaders if the starting points and the educational component is not geared around what is going to deliver
yeah,
the right talent for the future? So, as I said, I probably haven't answered your question specifically around the social piece, but I get the challenge, right? Like w- I think anyone who is a specialist needs to understand the core concepts of marketing. You
yeah,
cannot just be a technical expert on a channel or platform. You can't.
mm,
To be a really good, solid, well-rounded marketer and or digital professional, strategic digital professional, you have to go well beyond the tactics.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess broadly speaking, I mean, because I want to probably touch on a bit more around the leadership aspect of your career, because as you mentioned, I think earlier when you were certainly CMO at World Vision, I think was it 70 people, 75 people,
75 in the end. Yeah, maybe it was 72 or 73, to be honest, but I think I just rounded up to 75.
big number.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know that I've certainly managed teams in the past, but nowhere near that number, definitely not. And there's a lot that are going to be listening to this who are quite also new into that leadership period where they might have three direct reports, some have got larger.
Mm.
Like, were you ever given any advice around, was it just kind of sink or swim? Because obviously, you became that emerging manager where, you were getting bigger teams, bigger teams, bigger
Yeah.
teams.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you just sort of learn your groove? Like, how do you become good at leading a team? Like, is there any
Yeah, how do you become good? So I think, I mean, yes, I was, I didn't jump from 0 to 75, under management from a leadership point of view. My role prior to World Vision was at Officeworks, and I was leading a team of 10. But, going from 10 to 75 does require very, very different leadership skills and approach. And what it does require is, you need a really strong leadership team beneath you, or working with you. I don't want to say the word beneath you. That sounds awful. But, you need a really, really strong leadership team that can manage their kind of, functions. But you need that leadership team most of all to be able to work effectively together, not just lead individual functions, right? Because when leaders think their job is just to lead individual functions, silos build, we don't get the right outcomes, right? So building that really cohesive leadership team who are well versed and able to collectively come together to solve problems. So you as the leader do not need to come in to solve every issue and challenge that is emerging is really, really important. I think secondly, from a leadership point of view, what is so important when you're leading large teams is that everyone has a really, really strong understanding of where we are trying to go and what it's going to take for us to get there, right? And that, one of the things that I learnt very early, there was a speaker I heard overseas, and I cannot for the life of me remember his name. And he was talking about the importance of communication in transformational journeys. And this is stuck. I heard this 10 years ago, and I repeat it to clients verbatim all of the time. In a transformation environment, you need to communicate 10 times as much as you normally would.
Yeah.
And so taking on leadership roles, and typically my leadership roles are transformation roles because my kind of skill set and bent and, I am a bit of usually brought into organizations as a change agent. My priority and focus was really around creating that clarity and then ensuring that everyone across the team understood exactly where we were going. And that meant I wasn't communicating at once. How do I reinforce that message around our vision, our direction, our journey, our progress? How did I use every opportunity to do that within the team, but then also across the organization? The alignment, right? Because as soon as the rest of the organization becomes misaligned around the priorities and where we're trying to, where we're all effectively trying to go, because what we're doing from a marketing point of view has to be aligned with the corporate strategy. But as soon as we start to see misalignment and the strategy changing and going in a different direction, this is where we have friction within the organization.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
It does. I think it's that consistency of the message. You're going through such, and I mean, these are big businesses,
I know.
and you've got a lot of pressure on your shoulders, and so it's very, it can be quite intense, and it can also be quite stressful.
You have to anchor people back to, we agreed we're going here. We agreed we're going here. Now, we can make strategic decisions to move in another direction, but we can't just keep adding and layering and, somebody's got a new brilliant idea, so let's just throw that into the mix, right? And so that did require a lot of kind of time, energy, and effort for me as a leader to work across the organization and then back into my team to ensure communication channels were open. And we were able to stay the course, to be honest, because there is so many distractions in a transformational environment, so many new ideas, etc. But the brands that really make the difference are the ones that create a level of clarity around where they're trying to go and somewhat stick to that plan. And I say somewhat because there are going to be things you learn which sees you adapting. But adapting for the sake of adapting because somebody else has had a good idea is just a recipe for, an ability for the project and purposes to go off course, right? So I think those two things really important because if the team understand where you're trying to go and how they fit in and the importance of what they do and how that ladders back up to achieving the overarching objective, then you've got a fighting chance. And I'll just make one more point. Back to your social media piece. If you treat your team like mushrooms, they're going to act like mushrooms, right? And what I mean by that is still today, we see it all the time. We see mid-level managers, individual contributors not being exposed to company strategy, not being exposed to marketing strategy and direction, and just being fed information to execute. If you
Mm,
want your teams to step up and be more
yeah.
strategic and think beyond channels and think about integration, then start treating them in a way that they are empowered with the information to make more informed decisions and
Mm,
play a much bigger role. Because that's partly why they are focused on channel execution, because
yeah.
it's coming from the top in part, and that's going to be
Yeah.
confusing as a message to put out there, but it's true.
I think you just nailed it actually. And I love the mushroom analogy. I've not heard that one before. But also as a recruiter, that's when I get people speaking to me going, I'm not being given growth opportunities.
Mm,
Like I'm not being, there's no opportunity for me to step up.
yeah.
Like, it's just do, do, do.
Yes,
Um,
that's right.
I want to go back to your career. So when I have a look back, I mean, we go back a little bit down memory lane here, but you started off in
I
automotive.
did.
And so, yeah, I think it was Ford, and then you went to Mercedes
I
Benz.
did.
And so, I mean, back then, like, did you always have this hunger in you, this ambition and drive to actually get to like, CMO and level? Or, I mean, when I look back, I mean, those brands I would have thought would have been a fantastic training ground
Yeah.
to really, get you on a really solid starting point within your career.
So, I'd love to say, yes, I had this vision to become to be senior, but the reality is that, when I chose to do marketing, when back in 1998, because that's the year I graduated from school, you had those career course books and you looked through them to work out what do I want to do, and there was a couple of lines about each type of,
Yeah.
profession. And I saw marketing and advertising, went, great, I want to do that. And thought that would be a great career move because I wanted to make advertising. And,
Yeah.
and I'm not a very creative person, so the irony to all that. So I think early on in my career, I probably didn't know that I wanted to be a CMO. In fact, the department I was working in at Ford, it was a B2B department. So I think that I am innately ambitious, and so I
Mm,
have this drive and hunger to always be better and to always be moving on to the next thing, which is surprising in part because I've been running my business for 5.5 years. This is not my typical behavior. But so I think I always had that ambition and drive. And to be honest, I grew up in the country, so I didn't have a lot of, professional networks through
mm,
my parents. My parents were entrepreneurs, so that's probably where I've derived my entrepreneurial spirit from. But I didn't have a lot of mentors to
mm,
even, work it out. So I had to work it out myself.
mhm,
And I think probably curiosity has held me in good stead. I would say probably, if I could pinpoint it, maybe when I came back from the UK, that was when I
mm,
probably started to, I moved back into larger organizations and probably started to think about, yeah, that's the type of role I want to be in. But I think my career transitions have always been about what's next for me, what's the next challenge?
mm,
And what's that common thread for my skills, and then what might challenge me next? So,
mm, mhm,
I've never wanted to just take on another role which was like my last role. It had to bring something new to my skill set or stretch me, if that makes
mm.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think, yeah, look, I think it's really interesting because we start off and we never really know kind of which way we're going to sort of divert, and then we get a little bit more confidence, and you go, you know what, I can do that, I
Yeah.
can go for
Yeah.
it. Were you somebody that sort of was very good at seizing and identifying the opportunities?
Mm.
Because I see now people that, I mean, let's be honest, we don't see resumes or experience where it's 10 years in a role and then they go on to the
Yeah.
next, it can
Yeah.
be 2 years, if that, or three. And then a lot of those moves are quite calculative because it's like, I want to get that promotion.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
I think there's a couple of things in that question that I'll talk to. The first is that I think my calculated moves were more internally when I was in roles versus when I was out
Mhm.
in market from a role perspective. And what I mean by that is I've always been one to put myself forward for a new project or identify a project that I think needs to be addressed or initiative that needs to be addressed, and then figuring it out, right? If I
Yeah.
didn't have the skills. And I was never the person to put my hand up and say, okay, I'm now on higher duties. I want more money for that.
Mm,
And I'm saying this, and this is going to be really controversial. I know this is going to be really controversial, but acquisition of skills, new skills, is an investment in yourself.
yeah.
So I'm not advocating that, people step up and do higher duties for 12 months and they're not getting paid
Yeah.
for it. But if there's a project or an initiative that you think needs to be done, and you can proactively sell that into the business, and that gives you an opportunity to learn, and or there's a project that comes up or an initiative that comes up that allows you to acquire new skills,
Mm,
maybe think about shifting your mindset about what is the value for me? Because you
yeah.
want to take those skills with you, right? And that makes you more marketable in market.
Mm,
And so that is probably what I've found has allowed me to transition into the roles and get the breadth of experience that I have, is
mhm.
because within those roles, I was always looking for the opportunity to grow my skills in line with what the organization needed, right? You can
Yeah.
just go and do projects and initiatives that are not required by the organization.
Yeah.
But I had a bit of a playground in my role because in a lot of my roles, because often I was brought in to drive adoption and transformation of digital e-com,
Mhm, mhm,
et
mhm.
cetera. So I had a bit of a playground to do that. But then I would really challenge the organization around what is that is gonna look like. What are those
Yes.
projects that I can sink my teeth into that expose me to new things? So,
Yeah.
and then the second thing I would say is that if you look at my CV, you will notice that I have not really stayed in one industry my whole career.
No. Yeah.
And I would
Yeah.
say that that is probably a little bit more deliberate than as I moved through my career versus, knowing that I wanted to be a CMO,
Yeah.
very, very early on. I think the reality is in the Australian market, the market is very small. So if
Mm,
you
mhm.
pigeonhole yourself into one sector or category, as you move up the tree, there are fewer and fewer jobs, right? And your ability then to transition across to another industry is more limited because you are pigeonholed as a specialist and you don't show necessarily versatility on your CV.
Mhm, mhm.
So my advice would be, as much as possible, is try and, build knowledge across an array of industries to bring more versatility, to be
Yeah.
exposed to different environments, different industries, different thinking, different approaches, because
Yeah.
that ultimately does make you a better marketer and a better business and commercial leader.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think, I know with cost of living, salary, money in general is very much at the forefront for pretty much most people. And I
Mm,
get that completely.
yes.
But I think, there's times when if you've got that opportunity to step up, even if it's like, temporarily for a project or a
Right.
campaign for, do it,
Do it. That's right. And sometimes asking for that additional money
Mm,
might mean you don't get that opportunity.
yeah.
And again, this is why for me, I think if we shift our mindset to think about what is the upside for me, because I take those skills with me, and over time that will pay back. That will
Um,
absolutely pay back in more senior roles you obtain over time, the
mm,
remit that you get, all of that, it pays back over time. Or if you want to go and start your own business like me, all of the amazing skills and experience I've acquired over time is allowing me to do what I'm doing now.
mhm. I guess that really feeds into my final question.
Mm,
So I want to, I guess, talk a little bit more about. I always kind of wrap up around legacy and impact. So I want to, when you look back at, where you are so far. I mean, you've got many more years ahead. I've got no doubt. I guess you've worked with some incredible people, incredible
mm.
organizations. Is there anything that is really important to you that you want to be remembered by?
Oh, wow, that's such a big question.
It's a big hard hitter.
Do you know, I think practically the clients that we work with, what is ultimately important for us is that they derive value from the work that we do. And that
Mhm.
sounds really simple, but it's not just about making a buck for me. It's about I want to see change in those organizations. That's why I do what I do, and I'm really passionate about what I do. So I get a real personal kick out of hearing that, if we've developed a really robust 3 to 5 year strategy or whatever, and the organization has been able to make the change, drive all of the change and roll out that strategy, there's nothing better than that feeling because they can see the tangible value in action within their organizations. So that does probably at a practical level give me a lot of satisfaction and is a legacy for those that engage us in a way. Because it comes back to ultimately, it also reflects on our reputation, right? If we haven't
Of course.
made the change, it's not going to bode well for us, our organisation over time. And I think, in this market, there are too many providers that are really transactional. They do just
Yeah.
about the buckets, churn and burn and whatever. So I think that is one of them. I think the broader one for me, if I'm truly honest at the moment, is probably the legacy that I can leave in the industry, which is why in part I started Arktic Fox. We are in, as I've said a number of times through this conversation, we are in a very, very different business environment than we historically have been in. The marketing industry is changing rapidly. We are not equipped as an industry locally to be able to grapple with the change. And the reason we do the yearly report that we do and a number of the other kind of educational initiatives that we put out in market is because we want to change the industry. We want to help the industry evolve. We want to help marketers be better, do better, be more respected within their organizations. And even if we've played a very small role in that through the thought leadership work that we do, through, the research that we do, then that's a great legacy to leave the industry at a certain point when I leave the industry, right? And I meet people all the time who say they admire me or they follow me, which I'm very touched by because sometimes you don't know who's listening.
Yeah.
And it's nice to know that people do actively seek you out to listen to what it is that you have to say and use that in their own roles or their own careers to make decisions. So, yeah, I think that's probably, one of the ones for me that, if I leave a legacy, if you like, to the industry, hopefully I've been able to make some change through dialogue and thought leadership.
Yeah. Well, I think there's going to be a lot of people already from this conversation who are going to be wowed by a lot of the stuff that you've said. And as I said earlier, I think you've hit the nail on so much. I think it's going to be a lot of big light bulb moments, as I've said. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the CMO Chapters podcast. Thank you so much. I know you're super, super busy. Appreciate the time.
Fantastic. No, it's been great. Thank you.
Remember, the road to CMO isn't always linear. It's filled with challenges, decisions, and moments of transformation. Whether you're charting your course or navigating a career shift, the experiences, wisdom shared today, as with our guests, is invaluable. Thank you for joining us. Keep dreaming big, keep pushing boundaries, and remember that your journey towards becoming a CMO is as much about the destination as it is about the growth you experience along the way. Until next time, continue to innovate, evolve, and carve out your path to CMO.